In this video, I'm going to show you some footage of the event held by 19 nurses at the University of Manchester regarding Lucy Letby. Before I go any further, I need to explain a couple of things. Firstly, I have permission to present these videos. And secondly, I decided to do a presentation format for these videos where I'm going to convey some additional information alongside some of the highlights from speakers at the event. This will be favourable for YouTube, and although I have the permission to repost all of the videos in their entirety, I'm going to try to do this in such a way as to make it more interesting and also to respect the original creator. With that being said, in this video I'm going to show you an extract from the talk of Senior Coroner's Officer Stephanie Davies and also the talk from obstetrician Dr. Martyn Pitman. Both of these professionals are quite well known to me now, and they've both been interviewed by me on this channel, and they'll both be coming back onto the channel again in the future. So I'm going to begin with Stephanie's talk, but before I do that I'm going to give you some background on Stephanie. Stephanie has BCs in Applied Psychology and Forensic Science and an MSc in Forensic Behavioural Science. Stephanie is currently studying for a doctorate in coronial manner of death determination. In the early part of her talk, Stephanie discusses shadowing NYPD homicide detectives. She worked for Cheshire Police for 17 years, including on the Operation Hummingbird investigation of the County Chester Hospital, and has been the officer for over 5,000 deaths, which means that she has spoken to over 5,000 families about how their loved ones died. She was promoted to the head of department at Cheshire Police, leading a full team of coroner's officers. Stephanie has extensive CPD certification across blood stain pattern analysis, medicine for coroner's officers, coroner's law and the bereaved, medico-legal death investigation, investigative skills and file quality, investigating staged crime scenes, psychological autopsy investigation, advanced homicide investigation, medical examination, Forensic Medical Sciences, and Death Investigation Training Academy certification. Stephanie has also written 2 book chapters in Forensic Psychology, Crime and Policing, Key Concepts and Practical Debates, and Equivocal Death, Investigating Suicide, Accidental and Other Questionable Deaths. Stephanie has also received 2 Chief Constables commendations and an award nomination for Team of the Year. As mentioned, she has 17 years working in coronial studies for Cheshire Police and was promoted to the highest position as Senior Coroner's Officer at the Constabulary. Finally, I've interviewed Stephanie twice, so you can check out those interviews if you haven't seen or heard them previously. So I'm going to begin this clip of Stephanie's talk at this point. And in the early parts of this, she's talking about her treatment from Cheshire Police, and will go on to speak about her role in Operation Hummingbird.
And they decided to target me instead. So my house was searched, personal property, even personal property that was not covered by the search warrant was taken. I was subjected to interviews under caution. My private personal diaries were read out to me, whilst I was having to say no comment to all these questions, even though I wanted to speak, but my solicitor said, say no comment, don't say anything. So I felt like I had no choice. And they even threatened to read out all of my diary entries. And I was thinking, what's this got to do with the report I wrote on the Wilmslow cases? Why are they trying to make me feel so rubbish? And they even inferred that I must not have been very rational when I wrote my reports because of what I've written in my personal private diary. Now, I was born deaf. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 4 years old. I wear hearing aids. So I'm used to being very introspective. It's not normal for me to reach out and talk to people. So one way of getting thoughts out was in my private diary. So I felt psychologically raped when they went through all my personal things. And all this time I'm still waiting, for feedback on my concerns. I believe that the whole force were under instruction to not talk to me. Even the coroners were told they're not allowed to talk to me. So I was suspended, and I was facing disciplinary, I was facing criminal charges. Cheshire Police tried to get me charged with data protection breaches and misconduct, gross misconduct in public office. The CPS said no. Cheshire Police then appealed that decision. The CPS said no again. And then I finally found out that I wasn't going to be charged. And then there was a disciplinary held in my absence. They wouldn't let my lawyer go. They wouldn't give me disclosure of all the evidence that they'd found. And they then wrote a letter to me saying, we would have sacked you had you not resigned. And we're now placing you on the College of Policing barred list. So I'd been truthful all the way through. So a bit like Lucy, she'd been truthful, thought I'll cooperate with the police. All I've ever done is tell the truth. And I lost my job. So now talking about the Lucy Letby case, I think a few of you or most of you are familiar with this part of my life. So I was asked by Cheshire Police to review the case or review the spike in neonatal deaths in May 2017. There was a letter received by the Countess of Chester to Cheshire Police, and 2 days later I was asked to go to a gold group meeting. So I was asked by the Assistant Chief Constable to review all of the deaths between, it was June 2015 and June, or the end of June 2016. So review all of those, look at the cause of deaths, and then report the next morning, are these deaths explained? So they did not ask me to look for deliberate harm, they just said, are these deaths explained? So I went back to the office, had less than 3 hours to do the review before I was going to be kicked out of the building. I found there were 13 deaths. So 2015 there were 8, and 2016 there were 5. 4 of those deaths were what the coroner refers to as Part A, Form A deaths. All that means is that the doctor had a discussion with the coroner's officer and the coroner authorised for that doctor to issue a medical cause of death certificate. So there's no further investigation from the coroner's point of view. 5 had paediatric post-mortem examinations. Paediatric pathologists are incredibly detailed. We do get hospital pathologists and you get forensic pathologists, but paediatric pathologists are on almost the same level as forensic. They are incredibly detailed. The post-mortem reports can be 15 to 20 pages long. So these are very, very detailed, and this is what I spent most of my time looking at, these post-mortem reports. The cause of death did come back as natural causes, or for some of them, prematurity. 2 were subjected to inquests. So 1 had been heard, that was baby A. And the other one that was due to be heard later on in May, that was baby D, I believe. That was adjourned because of Operation Hummingbird. And then 2 were pending the coroner's final decision, and those were for babies O and P. I was going to come back and say the natural causes, they're explained, there's no common theme, I don't think we can go further with this. But it was a couple of post-mortem reports that gave me cause for concern, and especially for baby O, where the pathologist in his comments, he was saying a sequence of events, but there seems to be a gap. He's like, I can't figure out what's happened, how A caused B. There's something missing. And then I'm sure I saw that in another post-mortem report, but I'm going back 8 years now, so it was quite a long time ago. And I thought, there's missing information here. So the next morning, I said to Cheshire Police at this gold group meeting, I said, the cause of deaths are mostly natural, but there appears to be missing jigsaw pieces. There are gaps, and I don't know what those gaps are. It seems like if the hospital are now saying that they've got new information or new evidence, that may then alter the causes of death. So it may be that you need to look further into this. Now, I was expecting Cheshire Police to then consult with those original paediatric pathologists and then get a team of experts. That's what I was expecting. Now, I had no further involvement with Operation Hummingbird after I did my review. I was completely sidelined. The coroner was sidelined. It was now a police investigation, nothing to do with the coroner. it was now the police, so we had to keep out of it. But it was only after my employment ended that I started to see some more red flags. And I thought this was, because of the detail, the long investigation, I thought this must be a genuine murder or multiple murder case. The first thing was the so-called confession notes. And this was during the first trial, and it was all like a big, wow, yes, she's definitely done it. Look, she said she's evil, she's done it. And I thought, no, that's subjective behavioural evidence. That's not tangible forensic evidence, in my opinion. And then there are other notes saying that she was innocent, so it's like there's conflict there. So how can they be so sure that this is a genuine confession? She's under investigation, she's traumatised. So that can explain it. When my report about the Wilmslow cases was leaked, I felt guilty. I felt like I had done something wrong. I don't now, I believe I did the right thing. But then I felt incredibly guilty, and I thought I'm the worst person in the world. I've let down my police force. So this I found concerning. I also found it really concerning how a retired paediatrician was actually allowed to change not only the cause of death for some of these babies, but the manner of death. The manner of death needs to be determined by a coroner, not a retired paediatrician. And there was evidence that there was confirmation bias in several forms. So in the hospital, with the principal accusers, they were allowed to have quite a lead role in the investigation. Within the police, now seeing confirmation bias already, within the Wilmslow cases, seeing it again in this case. And even through the media as well, the way they described Lucy, there was bias there as well. And then later on, it became apparent that there was a refusal to consider these alternative explanations. And what we've been seeing is doubling down when being criticised. Doubling down in the hospital, doubling down in the police. The police also doubled down with the Wilmslow cases. So what happened with these two cases then? In my view, the science has been misinterpreted. Behaviour has been misinterpreted. Assumptions have been made. Oh, she came across her with no emotion in court. Well, she may have been medicated. She may have been traumatised. I was heavily medicated after the Wilmslow report had been leaked. I was in such a state. And so when I was interviewed, I was a little bit without emotion. Missing those red flags, those little warning signs along the way. Did nobody stop to think, something's not right here? Did nobody stop to think that? Failing to consider the alternative. So in medicine, it's differential diagnoses. What are the alternatives? Could there be other explanations? That lack of professional curiosity. In the adversarial policing system, it's either there's a crime or there's no crime, and then you make the evidence fit. With coroners and inquisitorial investigations, you're trying to establish what happened. So you're trying to seek the truth, so you have that professional curiosity. The inappropriate appointments of experts. There really needed to be a multidisciplinary panel, in my opinion, for Operation Hummingbird. And I did say to Cheshire Police for the Wilmslow cases as well, it's needed. But that was ignored. Not being inquisitorial, seeking the truth is vital, not seeking results. And there is a fundamental lack in the UK of staged crime scenes and equivocal deaths. UK police officers are not being taught about it. There's no literature on the topic, and I know that because I've done a literature review for my doctorate. And common theme, confirmation bias. We can't get away from it, but we need to minimise it. So the next steps, I think there needs to be an independent inquiry into both the Wilmslow cases and the Lucy Letby case. Now, who's the best person to do that, I don't know, because I don't have much faith, if I'm honest. But those cases need to be taken off Cheshire Police, in my opinion. Complex death investigations, they need to be inquisitorial. If it's 100% adversarial, then it's one side against the other. It's about making the evidence fit, and it's whichever side performs the best in court. And it shouldn't be like that. And organisations, they need to acknowledge when they've made mistakes. That includes hospitals and police forces. So that's pretty much the end of my my talk. I hope I didn't go over my allotted time. Thank you. I have done a website. It's a little bit more about me, about my experience and some other cases I've reviewed. And you can contact me by email as well. And that's the end. Thank you all so much. Okay, thank you.
An excellent talk from Stephanie covering some topics that we've discussed previously on the channel. In fact, it's becoming increasingly clear that the police investigation of the Countess of Chester and ultimately Lucy Letby was calamitously incompetent. This will be further discussed on the channel later this week with more new information coming out. Now, I've grouped Stephanie's talk together with Dr. Martyn Pitman because they have the obvious commonality of being whistleblowers who were treated somewhat ruthlessly by their employers. Dr. Martyn Pitman was a highly regarded obstetrician and gynaecologist and still is highly regarded by many of his patients. He lived and worked in his hometown of Winchester, and in his interviews with me, which you can see on the screen now, he told us about how proud he was of the standards of that hospital and of the work that he did. However, if you look up Martyn today, it's virtually impossible to find any internet reference to any of the work that he did, because Googling his name brings up documents that are completely dominated by his experience as a whistleblower, which was not a favourable experience. And so before we go into Martyn's talk, I'm going to discuss what occurred and what Martyn said when he unfortunately lost his tribunal. Now, it's been mentioned previously on this channel that winning an industrial tribunal against a big medical organisation in this country has become virtually impossible. I'm not sure if it was always impossible historically, but essentially you have virtually no chance of doing this. Once you're up against a big NHS institution and the weight of that institution starts bearing down on you, it's incredibly difficult to defend yourself. Again, this is not only something that Stephanie and Martyn have in common with each other, it is, naturally enough, something that they have in common with Lucy Letby herself. When interviewed by ITV, Dr. Pitman said the following: "My concerns were about midwifery staffing levels, deteriorating midwifery morale, the loss of some of what I felt were our most experienced and most valued midwives, high absenteeism rate of midwives through sickness, and the fact that on a daily basis we were being expected to cover our clinical service with far fewer midwives than were recommended to provide a safe level of care. I was doing what I thought was the appropriate thing to do, and never for 1 minute dreamt that it would end up in threatening and end up terminating my career. It's been a devastating end to a really traumatic and difficult 4-year period. Having worked so hard in the city where I was born, was educated, grew up, and undertook part of my training was the proudest day of my professional career, and it's taken me to the darkest places that I could ever imagine. As an experienced, skilled and dedicated doctor who has had the privilege of caring for countless patients over the past 30 years, it is devastating to realise that my dismissal from the trust signals the end of my cherished career. Throughout my 20 years of being a consultant at the Hampshire Hospitals Trust, I have made so many sacrifices to the benefit of both the trust and the patients that I have been clinically responsible for, during a career dedicated to provision of safe, patient-focused and evidence-based care. The decision to uphold my dismissal is crushing. It also poses a potential direct threat to patient and staff safety by setting a very worrying precedent for other doctors and members of staff who may now be too afraid to speak out when they have legitimate concerns or believe something is wrong for fear of the consequences." So among those rallying behind Dr. Pitman has been the Broadchurch actress Sarah Parish, who credits Martyn with saving not only her life, but also her daughter Nell's life. So Sarah presented a £2,000 cheque to Martyn as a celebration at Winchester Rugby Club and thanked her former consultant for saving her and her baby's lives, which led to her and partner James Murray creating the Murray Parish Trust to support the work of Southampton Children's Hospital. Despite the Employment Tribunal finding against Dr. Pitman, Ms. Parris said that there is no way that he did anything wrong. Ms. Parris said, "I know he's a real fighter, an incredibly clever man, so he must have thought it through to an inch of his life. The tribunal system is corrupt, there is no doubt, and because of that, there is no point. It would have been terrible for his mental health to carry on, but we certainly haven't heard the last of him. I have to care because someone like Martyn Pitman is fired from the job he's so brilliant at. I'm sure I can speak for all his supporters. We all know Martyn Pitman and how brilliant he is. Hundreds of women have told incredible stories. There is no way that man has done anything wrong. All he did was speak up and try and make it better. They have lost the best obstetrician in Winchester. I will always support him in whatever endeavours. If I can help him, I will. I'm always here for him." Another supporter is Mel Smart, who was one of the hundreds of patients treated by Martyn Pitman. She said, "He was responsible for saving my life. I don't know how you can thank someone for letting them be a mother to their children." Mr. Pitman was the actor's consultant for both her pregnancies at the Royal Hampshire County Hospital in Winchester. The first being in 2007 with Ella Jane. She was born with a congenital heart defect after an emergency caesarean section and died at just 8 months old. Miss Parrish was pregnant again at 41 and was coming up to 34 weeks while working abroad when she felt something wasn't right. The actor believes it was thanks to Mr. Pitman that she and her now 14-year-old daughter are alive and healthy. Miss Parrish was among many friends and family who gathered at Winchester Rugby Club on Saturday the 25th of November to show their support for Mr. Pitman. The TV star, who's known for such shows as ITV's Bancroft, said, "It was a really good afternoon, very emotional but full of love and support for Martyn, like I knew it would be. Martyn got to say what he wanted to say and it was really hard for him, but in a way probably a huge relief that he can now turn this page of his life." In addition to that, I'll just mention finally as well that Martyn is supported by the British Medical Association and has a Facebook page with over 1,000 supporters. With that being said, let's have a look at Martyn's talk in its entirety.
My name is Martyn Pitman. I'm an ex-NHS consultant, obstetrician and gynaecologist, and I've obviously been given the pre-bar slots for the presentations today, so which is going to be perhaps a bit of a challenge. And I'm going to present to you today on my experiences as an NHS whistleblower and how I think there is some quite significant relevance to the experiences that I was exposed to the Lucy Letby case. So this was the proudest day of my professional life. I was appointed as a consultant into the Royal Hampshire County Hospital in Winchester on the 3rd of February 2003. This was the hospital that I was born in. So I was appointed to be a consultant in the hospital where I was born, where I grew up, where I was educated, where I undertook some of my registrar training to be a consultant. So it was a very fortunate position to be in. It was my dream job. I loved my job as a consultant. Winchester was a great unit. It punched above its weight. We delivered about 3,200 babies, and it was renowned both locally and nationally to offer a very commendably good maternity service, and our outcomes were pretty universally very good over an extended period. And I took great pride in the job that I did. I was the go-to consultant for most of the members of staff and also most of the other consultants, most of the midwives, nurses, local GPs, and consultants that lived in the area. And that was something that I didn't take lightly. I thought it was something I took great pride in providing that service. As happened to many hospitals of the size of Winchester, we merged with this unit, which is the unit in Basingstoke, in 2012, so 9 years after I was appointed. And this is a unit that was diametrically opposite to Winchester as far as the ethos of the management of the maternity service. At Winchester, we operated on a more traditional system where the consultants led the service, but we had a very, very positive cooperative relationship with our clinical midwifery colleagues, which worked really well. Basingstoke, over the recent time, I worked there as a registrar for 2 years, and it developed a system where a group of senior clinical midwives had migrated into midwifery management, and that had been encouraged and promoted by the consultant obstetricians, and they had gone along the normalisation path, which is, I believe, is one of the reasons that the maternity system in the UK is in the difficulty that it's been in. And what it provokes when you try to push two departments together was analogous, in my view, to trying to mix oil with water. However much you shake it, it doesn't work. And the difficulty we faced at Winchester, the philosophy we were being expected to adopt was basically what we do at Basingstoke is the way to go. And it's either you do what we do or you don't. And that was a challenge. So by the spring of 2019, it was perfectly clear as a senior clinician in our department that things were significantly deteriorating. There were spirally deteriorating standards of care and safety of care. And along with that, our clinical midwifery colleagues were becoming increasingly demoralised. Sickness rates escalated, and all of the managerial positions went to the Basingstoke originating midwives. So our midwives based at Winchester saw no career progression. And perhaps naively, I took great credit that the midwives particularly used me as a sounding board and as a spokesperson, because I think they knew that if they felt strongly about something, that I would do something about it. So I acted as a spokesperson for them and also for my clinical consultant colleagues in obstetrics. I whistle blew. I was concerned that over time we were struggling to provide basic clinical services to our patients. We were having inductions of labour for medical reasons delayed. It was almost became the norm that we would come into the unit and be unable to do elective caesarean sections because we were short of midwifery staffing to support them. So I whistle blew. I did what every clinician in the NHS should realise is a basic and fundamental part of not only their professional responsibilities, but also their moral responsibilities to stand up for their patients, which is not exactly what we've been hearing this afternoon, and to do what is right to try and improve and optimise patient care and patient safety. That was what I did. So what was I like as a senior clinician? Well, this, I think, is an example of that, and that is one of many boxes of thank you cards that I collected over my career. And I took that picture for a Guardian journalist. I think we've got a couple of Guardian journalists here, but a brilliant journalist called Sirin Kale studied what happened to me and one of my patients, and she said, have you got any images of things you've been given by patients? So I took this picture, I laid them all out on my lounge carpets, and it was quite an emotional event. I was incredibly hardworking, I was diligent. I, now looking back on it, made immense personal sacrifices to provide what I thought was optimal standards of patient care. Repeatedly through what happened to me after I whistle blew, I was told that this wasn't about your clinical standards, you have exemplary clinical standards. I had an immaculate 30-year history of annual appraisals. They were commendable. I had 2 completely gold standard GMC revalidations, the latest one of which had been completed and signed off by the very person who professionally came after me 2 months prior to her launching a formal investigation into my conduct. When I questioned that with her, I was told, your appraisal, word for word, your appraisals and revalidation are irrelevant to this process. So I whistle blew with our head of service then, who was our head of midwifery, very bizarre meeting. She listened, nothing came back. She got emotional, she left her office, she never came back. I was talking to her in the same tone as I'm talking to you. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't swear, I didn't get angry. I stayed balanced, I stayed professional. I told her my concerns for the patients that she was responsible for. A couple of weeks later, after some weird events over the preceding 2 weeks, I was summoned, which I realised was a standard part of the process if you've got yourself in the bad books in an NHS trust. They do things to you late on a Friday afternoon because they know damn well that you can do absolutely nothing about it. So at 4:30, I trundled across the car park. I'd been summoned to a meeting that I was falsely told was it was not a formal meeting, it was an informal meeting to discuss communication issues that have been raised with the trust senior management about our department. I walked straight into what in the first 30 seconds became absolutely obvious was the launch of a formal disciplinary investigation, what's called a maintaining high professional standards investigation against me. On the table were plasticized printed dossiers of utter garbage that had been fabricated by the person that I had whistleblown to and her senior midwifery managerial colleagues. Fabricated nonsense about me and what I had supposedly done, but I hadn't. I was urged to sign terms of reference, which I refused. They'd been deliberately written to catch me out. I was accused of bullying, I was accused of harassment, I was accused of undermining behaviour, and I was told that the case manager had been appointed to my case, who happened to be a close working associate of my main complainant, and I was told that this investigation, because of the effect it would have on me, would last for 6 weeks. It lasted for over 18 months. I was told on Monday we have an appointment for you to see the occupational health consultant because this is going to be challenged to. I saw her. I was then banished from my career. I was told until your investigation is complete, you can't work on the main site at Winchester, you can't do label, you can't do on-calls, you can't do your ultrasound scan list. I did fetal medicine scanning. I was banished to the local cottage hospital where I was only allowed to do outpatients clinics and antenatal clinic. My fetal medicine scanning was demoted to that of a basic ultrasonographer. And that was where I stayed for essentially 18 months whilst the investigation into me was conducted. This was a lonely, desperate, incredibly isolating existence. I was denied any contact with any of my consultant colleagues. I was denied any contact at all with any of my clinical midwifery colleagues. The terms of references for the investigation into me were not upheld. They were not upheld, but I was told, but you do have a problem. You have a problem with your communication style. So I was forced to have mediation with my remaining complainants, 2 of whom had actually left the trust when they realised I wasn't going to be immediately dismissed. And I was asked to go on an advanced communication course organised by the BMA, which I then duly did. Then things started to turn. I eventually returned back to work. It was perfectly clear that I was still being monitored. From the moment I walked back into the trust, there was an unnerving feeling that every conversation I had, every telephone discussion I had, every call that I did, every procedure I did was being very closely monitored. And then a tragedy happened. So we had a completely avoidable maternal death, a lady who should never have been allowed to labour, let alone actively encouraged to labour, laboured and ruptured her uterus, had an amniotic fluid embolism, not a Dowie-Evans air embolism, and she tragically died. The baby survived, and it became perfectly, I wasn't a caller, I had nothing to do. I wish I had been consulted about this lady, because she certainly wouldn't have gone down the route that she did had I been. It was perfectly clear that moves were underway in the trust to cover up what had happened. So knowing that I was already in a precarious position, I thought, well, I can do one of 2 things. I can either shut up and let this happen, or I can say, hold on a second. So being me, I did the latter. I whistle blew internally about what had happened, and I was told to butt out. It was investigated, and my concerns were dismissed. So I whistle blew to the local coroner, and I converted a basic coroner's hearing into an adversarial coroner's hearing where at least this lady's husband and family got at least some of the answers that they deserved. I was dismissed 10 days before that coroner's hearing happened. I was, and this I shortened what happened, but basically the trust spent around between £800,000 and £1 million on legal input, and approaching £100,000 on 3 increasingly corrupt external investigations to basically prove that they could legally dismiss me under some other substantial reason, which is how they eventually dismissed me, but 10 days before this inquest, which wasn't a coincidence. And what followed were fabricated accusations about me being clinically incompetent to perform the consultant role that I performed with some credit for nearly 20 years. So 3 years after I whistle blew, CQC descended on the trust, and they wrote a damning report into the unit. Interesting that they found every single deficiency that I'd found 3 years earlier, every single one of them. The service was downgraded to improvement needed, and my department was placed on the NHS England Maternity Improvement Scheme. And when the Trust Chief Executive and the Director of Nursing, both of whom were instrumental in achieving my dismissal, were interviewed by the local press, their economy of truth in what they said to the press extended to them feigning complete surprise about what CQC had found. They were interviewed on the local TV, and they said it was all a great surprise to them, whereas I and other people had warned exactly about these problems 3 years earlier. When I was dismissed, there was a pretty commendable amount of both local and national press interest about my dismissal. I was sacked as a whistleblower, and that was pretty trendy at the time. So I appeared in the Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian, and the local newspapers. And I submitted a grievance against the trust, what happened to me, and I have full BMA-supported pursuit of a whistleblower detriment case through the Employment Tribunal. Just before, in the month before my highly unpleasant experience in the Employment Tribunal, the trust went on a charm offensive to try and prove to the world that they actually supported whistleblowing and freedom to speak up. So wherever you looked in the trust, or on all the computer screens, that was the screensaver. All of the printed paperwork that went out of the trust had "We support whistleblowing and freedom to speak up," and they even went as far on the right-hand side as paying out for a private artist to paint 3 murals on the wall in each of the hospitals, just to try and convince people that rather than destroying whistleblowers, they actually actively supported them. So I entered this hellhole of a place about 2 weeks after Lucy Letby's judgment came out, and I had been totally and utterly focused on what I was doing, and I had just been seduced by the mainstream media and press about Lucy Letby. I was certain when her verdict came out that she was guilty, absolutely certain. And I naively thought I was the first NHS whistleblower to get into a courtroom after Lucy Letby, and because at the time when I went in, I thought, oh, the doctors in the cancer to Chester were the whistleblowers. You know, they're the heroes in this. I naively thought because of that my passage through this dire process would go in my favour as another NHS whistleblower. It wasn't until a few weeks later when I saw the Carmarthen clown being interviewed in his back garden, and I thought, hold on a second, this doesn't add up. This guy is an absolute charlatan, that I started then to be in the position where I am now, where I realise that every single fragment of what is being presented as evidence is unsafe in her conviction. So you enter as a whistleblower into a court in the UK. So I entered that courtroom knowing that I should have won, but also knowing that I had a 97% chance of failing. Those were the statistics then. Just take that in for a second, a 97% chance of failing. Now, it's a 99% chance of failing. That is how dire it is. You are set up to fail. A lot of local and national press interest, just here in relation to the court. Every day of the court, there were 50 patients with banners, T-shirts, supporting me. It was an incredibly sobering experience. But I lost. The case went as well as it could have gone. I had a very experienced barrister. In the space of 5.5 weeks, we went from being taken to the pub to celebrate that my barrister, this was in the bag, having discussions about what level of settlement I would accept, to receiving a judgment which read like it was a completely different case to the one that I spent 2 weeks traversing. It was astonishing that could happen in the UK. The judgment concluded that I was a whistleblower, no great surprise there, but I lost the case because the judge inexplicably, there are reasons which I won't go into, but inexplicably said he was unable to link any of the detriments that I suffered to my whistleblowing. I lost my job apparently, not because of what I said. I lost my job and any chance of re-establishing a career, not because of what I said, but astonishingly because of how I said it. That was why I lost my career. So I've got perhaps not surprisingly, a very dire view of what it's like to get into the UK legal system. I think it's a highly dangerous place to go. In my own view, in my opinion, the employment tribunal system in the UK is corrupt and it is broken. And until that changes, none of this is going to change. Maternity care is not going to improve. In my case, there is absolutely no record at all of what happened in my hearing. It wasn't recorded, it wasn't minuted, nothing was transcribed. The only legally admissible record of what happened to me are my judge's handwritten notes, and guess what? I have absolutely no legal right to get a copy of those, having tried. I am not permitted. How does that represent fair justice? How does that represent open justice? How does that not represent a breach of my basic human rights to a fair trial? In my view, after Lucy Letby's tragic case, I think somebody decided that the NHS was unable to tolerate the possibility of another whistleblowing case going against it, particularly one that involved its already beleaguered maternity service. So I and my career was seen as an expendable resource. It didn't matter if I was destroyed. It didn't matter if my career was destroyed. After my dismissal, I was making supper on the 5th of January 2024 in our kitchen, making supper, and I looked up and I was on the TV screen. I thought, what's this? So I rewired it on Sky, and the whole programme was taken up by what had happened to my department. And they interviewed patients, they interviewed staff, and they showed pictures of me and my family coming out of the employment tribunal. I was named, blamed, and shamed for what had happened in the department. And the trustee, then he thankfully now was retired, was announcing that we got over this, we got over the problems that this individual caused, and we moved on. But interesting, at the end of the interview, she was asked, can you reassure? They'd invited the local BBC into the unit. Can you reassure your patients that you're able to provide safe care for your patients? She hesitated. She giggled. Then she said, well, yes, but we have to accept that when it's busy, it can be a struggle. They'd invited the BBC in, and that was her response when asked if they could provide a safe level of service. And then I realised probably why they'd done that, because I was then told by an anonymous individual who worked in the trust that a presentation in the neonatal unit a month later had shown that they had detected significantly raised HIE rates for the non-medical people in the auditorium. This is basically most commonly labour-induced hypoxic, so oxygen starvation to the brain. Interestingly, this was the year after I was dismissed. Even more interestingly, I spent my career devoted to minimising HIE rates in that unit and have been commended repeatedly for my successful efforts in that regard. So because of the level of interest the press interest in what had happened in my case, and then when this was announced to them, it provoked a double-page spread by Sirin Gale in the Guardian on the left there, and I had an interview with the Hampshire Chronicle, and they announced this frightening statistic. The Trust's reaction to it was fascinating. Because initially, when the journalists contacted the Trust to discuss this, they denied it. They said, no, we have no record at all of that data, you need to check your source. So when I then gave them the source, they then said, oh, that data, oh yes. So they denied it, they then accepted it, and they then admitted that the increase equated to not just an increase, a 5 times increased risk of HIE. But then they did something that's even more incredible. They then did their own internal investigation into this stat, and guess what? The data was normalised, back to rates which were normal. So whistleblowing. It's a career peril in the NHS, and I think it is as bad, if not worse now, than it was in 2019 when I did what I did. I think most of us in here will know that Lucy Letby, we've heard so much about her today. She was a whistleblower, wasn't she? She was a whistleblower. She pressed the wrong buttons like I did. She threatened individual senior clinicians' reputation. She threatened the trust's manager's reputation. She threatened the organisational reputation, as I did. That will not be tolerated. And most NHS trusts to this day, if you do what I did, if you do what Lucy Letby did, they won't change the practices. They will take out the messenger. They will take out the whistleblower, which is why my job was ended, the career that I love was terminated, and that's why I believe what happened to Lucy Letby happened to Lucy Letby. She pressed the wrong buttons on the wrong people. So that's the very last baby that I ever delivered. That was the last cesarean section. Thank you.
So what very obviously unites the cases of Stephanie Davies and Dr. Martyn Pitman is all that they did was try to highlight problems within their organisations. They tried to improve practice. Again, that's another parallel that you could draw with Lucy herself. Stephanie did this in a very specific way and Martyn in a more general way, but in both circumstances you're talking about life and death situations. It's not some administrative error or someone getting a bad plate of fish and chips in the pub. You're talking about life and death. Their rewards for speaking out, for doing what is the right thing morally, ethically and professionally, for having high standards, was to have the rug swept from under them, their livelihoods taken away, and their careers ended immediately. Stephanie, as she mentioned in her talk, faced the potential of literal criminal charges. The police have dug up her garden, confiscated her property and intimidated her. Martyn has lost everything that's important to him, and as he mentioned to ITV, his career is completely over. He has no prospect of working again. It's too late in life for him really to do anything else, and that's before you consider the trauma and stress of the process that he's been through. So I'm not sure I can adequately summarise my feelings on this matter, or on the way that whistleblowers are treated generally, and on the systemic problems that run right through numerous important institutions and organisations in this country. All I can say is that all I can do is continue to work on Lucy's case, continue to expose things where I can, and then as my voice grows, continue to try to use it and help to enable others who can use their voices. That's the most that I can do at this point in time, but I think the tales of Stephanie and Martyn are both chilling and depressing. Finally, I just wanted to mention that I've released this video today, planning ahead for the rest of the month. It's going to be an extremely busy month for me, and obviously Christmas falls in this month as well, so I wanted to release videos on odd-numbered days. My last video before Christmas will be released on the 23rd, and then I feel that Boxing Day is a day where people may watch things, so I might release a video on the 26th of December. In addition, I have a lot of stuff going on this month, which means that I've needed to plan ahead with my content, and it's probable that there will be several of these presentation videos and also a lot more interviews than usual on the channel this month. I have arranged numerous interviews already, and I usually hold them back a little bit if I've recorded quite a few, but this time I'll probably not hold them back as much because there's other stuff that I need to concentrate on, so if I've recorded interviews, I'll just put them out. So there'll be a lot of interviews this month, several of them with new people you've not heard from before, and a couple with people that you're familiar with already. Finally, I just want to say again, thank you for supporting the channel, it's very much appreciated. I'm rapidly approaching 150,000 watch hours and also nearing 4,000 subscribers, so I'm really grateful for all the support I've received, and I'll continue to create content for as long as I can, likely the rest of my life. With that being said, if you have any queries, comments, etc. for this video, please do leave them in the comment section. I guess the last thing I should say as well is that I might be a little bit less active in responding to comments this month, but please do leave them as I'll read them all and I will still respond as much as I can, but it might be a bit less than in previous months. Finally, I must say thank you to 19 nurses for allowing me to present these videos. please do check out their channel. And if you're a healthcare professional and able to join 19 Nurses as a member, please do so. The website is quite easy to find, and I'll leave links to both the YouTube and the website in the description for this video.